Hello, I'm Ricky.
And I'm Joe, and this is season 5, episode 4 of the Beer and Broadband podcast, slated to come out on April 25th, 2022, which is tomorrow, because we were kind of slacking and we didn't get this recorded ahead of time. But today, we are going to talk about the Thunder Cookie Gingerbread Stout that I brewed over the holidays. I know I kind of talked about it last Christmas, but we haven't actually gotten to taste it. I know both of us have had this before too. So, Ricky, what are your tasting notes, man?
I think we talk about this one before? I know I certainly drank it several times, but that might have just been you shipping over with me.
I
But
I gave you some at Christmas, but we've never
yeah,
talked about it on the
it's
podcast.
pretty good. You know, I'm not as big a beer guy as you are, but this is a pretty good stout. It's not like overly sweet, but it's not like super dry. Got those kind of like caramely brown notes going on with it, but also some spices. You get like some vanilla, some ginger in there. You know, it's a gingerbread stout that takes your mind to gingerbread cookies. It's obviously not like quite that light and sweet to them, but you can definitely like you get that earthiness, you get that kind of like you know whatever that gingerbread spice is, whatever that mixture. You feel that in there.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's made from Boom Chungalug, and it is 6 point. Well, the company that sent me the kit for I didn't make up the recipe, but it's 6.2% ABV. Once it finished, going through and doing its thing, which was, you know, a nice, I think, balance of alcohol by volume to the spiciness, like you said. I have not taken a sip of mine yet. I was sitting here getting distracted and stuff. So, anything else you want to say about the beer?
No, it's pretty good. I mean, smooth. You brewed it well. There's not really like any off flavors to it.
Well, it's also been like
Been chilling out
five
for a
five.
while, yeah.
Yeah, it's had some time to rest.
Yeah, 'cause I think the last time I drank this was in January. I drank a couple of bottles of these. I forgot I saved one until you asked me to check. I had
Yeah,
one in the back of
I'm
the fridge.
that worked out really well. Since we couldn't like be together in person, it worked out a whole lot better this time. You know,
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
I think one of the things about it is it's got like a nice color. It's really nice and dark for a
Mhm.
stout, which is as it should be. It has, even though it doesn't have um, it doesn't like keep the head for like ever like a nitro stout wood or something like that. It still has like a nice tight carbonated um, head to it that came out really well. And I don't know, man. I love this thing. It's one of my favorite beers that I brewed. But I'm also I like really dark, you know, beers overall.
Yeah, I mean, this is one I could consistently drink. I'm not a big beer guy, but I like dark beers more than I like, the lighter colors of beer, just because those tend to be a little bit more bitter. But I think you did really well with this one. My
Yeah.
personal opinion.
Yeah, well, it's got some nice like dark stone fruit notes to it and some just some overall good flavors. If you because you can buy these off of Amazon or you can go to Boom Chuglug's site and buy them there. I'll put a link in the show notes for it. But the if you want something that's got a little bit of like plum notes and maybe or some date notes, something like that. So it's got those kind of nice fruity stone fruit kind of notes, and then on top of it, you want something that's going to, eh, have like some ginger and kind of remind you of a gingerbread cookie. That's what this beer is, and I don't think they sell it any other time other than during the holiday seasons. But if that's something you're looking to do, it was a pretty quick brew. It wasn't hard to make. You can buy it in extract or whole grain kits until I get like some sort of Anvil Brewer or something like that. I'm sticking to extracts for a while, so yeah, ended up being pretty good. Not unpleased with it at all. So the Steam Deck, it came out, man, and I'm probably not
Yeah.
going to get mine until like July to September because that's what it says on the page, and I'm disappointed.
Oh
There's a
yeah.
lot of sadness in my heart over this. Did you reserve one?
I did, though. I've just been lazily waiting to get an email about it. I haven't been keeping up with it.
Yeah, if you go to Steam's like main page, they have a thing saying, when you should expect to get your email on the Steam Deck page, and that will tell you when roughly you should be able to get one.
Oh,
I've been
okay.
watching all the like press releases and stuff like that, and I'm sad. I mean, but okay, I'm sad, but it's also it's fine. I'll get one eventually. I just was hoping that when they said Q2, it would be a little bit, you know,
Early
closer.
Q2.
Yeah, that like reviewers and everybody get theirs, and then towards the end of Q2, I would get my email and be able to get it. But so many people just can't get there. Just they haven't got the email, they haven't got any of the stuff. So it's understandable, but uh, with all the crap that's happening in the world, a little joy would have been nice. I mean, I still have my Miu Mini and stuff like that, and
Mhm.
PS Vita. So it's a um, luxury item overall. But yeah, I was hoping to get one.
Yeah, my wife is pretty hyped up for hers whenever it makes its way to us.
Yeah, you could always go spend the money for like AYN Odin, or you could get something like that. I mean, those are all like super expensive compared to the Steam Deck for the most part,
Yeah.
though. Yeah. So,
Of course,
other
from what
than
I've heard, the Steam Deck has been performing pretty well for the people that have it. So that's a definite plus considering some of the past hardware releases from Valve haven't been the smoothest.
are you talking about the VR headset that they released wasn't as deployed because their controllers and everything I think did pretty well. Um,
Their
on
controllers at the
the
beginning had some pushback. I think they fixed that design later. Their Steam Link as well, we kind of had mixed performance depending on what you did. Their VR headset stuff has actually always been pretty good,
Yeah,
but that's
yeah.
not all
Well,
in one.
so I got the Steam Link and the controller. Like, I was one of the first people to get it. I don't remember having any issues with my controllers or Steam Link. I mean, and of course, I kept mine wired in. I think most of the things that people were complaining about though were wireless performance with the Steam Link. Anyways, I don't remember overall, but yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, you're right. Yeah, sometimes their hardware partnerships and things like that they die pretty quick. Um,
yeah. A lot of the
Hopefully,
things they really get in and make themselves generally tend to do pretty good. So we'll just
hmm
see. I think I wasn't surprised to hear the Steam Deck was doing well. Obviously I reserved one, and I'm kind of happy with that.
yeah.
But it was that breath of relief. It's like, okay, my wife has me being, we're gonna buy one. How much do they cost? It's like, well, you just can reserve it for now. I'll reserve it. I'm not sure I'll commit to buying something that expensive until I know it works. So I'm glad to hear that people have been really enjoying it.
So here's a thing that's kind of semi-related to this. What do you think about all we got economic and crazy problems happening throughout the world,
Mhm.
uh, supply chain shortages, some things happening that seem to be more like false scarcity claims. With a lot of kit that's out there. Um, you know, what is it that 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 we're or the economic state that we're in right now? Not what is it? The economic state that we're in right now seems like the global economy is starting to kind of become segmented again. so that you have like localized economies or national economies that really drive things. And I guess my question to you is twofold. One, we've had this globalized economy for so long. What does that mean for technologies just like the Steam Deck and things like that? Take the gaming aspect out of it, but what does it mean for that? And is that is that a positive or a negative overall?
Hmm. I think there is something to be said for both arguments. On one end, cheap manufacturing overseas is just that, it's cheap. Doesn't isn't necessarily low quality, but it's a hell of a lot cheaper than doing it on the western side of the world. But there are all those concerns, right? Like there's the reason there's a Great Firewall of China. It's the reason that a lot of companies have to get their parts made at like 5 or 6 different places so that none of them all have a complete kit, unless you're, someone like Apple who can afford to buy a lot of privacy. You know,
Well, also
I think,
that's got to do with the supply chain too, right?
well, yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at. Like, one hand, yes, if you are just Joe Company and you need to get something made, it is cheaper to get it made in China or, really pretty much anywhere past Europe in the East than it is somewhere in what's generally considered the Western world. But you are very, very dependent on that supply chain. And, companies don't really have significant stock anymore. I forget what it's called. That's that thing Walmart kind of pioneered. Just in time delivery, I think is maybe the right term for it.
Yep.
Where there used to be, when I was a young lad, you go to a store and there's something that was on the shelf, you'd go to the quote unquote back and they generally had it and they'd bring it out. Well, there ain't so much of a quote unquote back anymore. Most stores only have an extra like couple days worth of stock. They expect things to, run out on Monday and show up on Tuesday on the truck. They get a couple days worth of supplies at a time. But it's the same thing for most electronics and everywhere else. And that's also a cost saving measure because owning these big warehouses and making a bunch of equipment you don't know you'll necessarily sell, that stuff costs money. But again, you're super reliant on this supply chain to always show up in time. So, and we saw this in the beginning of COVID, right? I think maybe that was a better example because that was less, we weren't getting things to the stores and more people were just buying them so quickly. But, you get all these massive outages because there isn't any extra. They have what they think they'll sell in a week and they get a new shipment next week. So if anything disrupts that, there's just not the product anymore. And that loses a lot of money to companies. So, me personally, I'm kind of for a lot of domestic production because even though it's a little bit more expensive, you're going to be able to more reliably get it. It feeds those local economies a bit better. But, I guess maybe I'm in the same place you are with the question. When we're in this world where things aren't showing up and shelves are empty in a lot of places, you can't get, manufacturing set up overnight. But are more companies really going to be thinking about it? We've already seen the tech side. There's like 3 more chip manufacturers setting up stakes in the US. A lot of that electronic stuff is starting to come home. But what about the other stuff? You know, Textiles used to be huge in the South, not anymore, but they could be. You know, we still have a lot of the materials. We'll grow a lot of stuff here in the U.S. and ship it off to be actually, processed somewhere else and then come back. That ain't so easy to do anymore.
Yep. I mean, even with all of so there's some things here that I think, not being a conspiracy theorist or anything like that, just plain out, there's patterns that happen, and we know that people do like weird stuff. They take advantage of things, and sometimes in a bad way. And it seems like companies have taken advantage of, oh, the pandemic, or oh, the worker shortage, or oh, the whatever, to sometimes artificially raise prices, or to be able to cause these kind of outages so that they can inflate the price of their stuff because their costs haven't necessarily gone up. It's not like somebody who makes toilet paper like suddenly ran out of the materials that it costs or that it takes to make toilet paper or something like that. And there's it's more complex than that. I'm just making a very simple example of what I'm talking about. But you know, if we're just looking at like groceries or consumer electronics or anything like that, there's a ton of stuff that has gained in price, while other things that still use those same components are, you know, able to sell at a reasonable cost. And I wonder if some of it is that, we as a global economy have, kind of we've not decentralized enough of our manufacturing. You know, if we were smart, we probably, and even if it costs a little bit more, um, we probably would have some manufacturing in America, in uh, you know Texas and California and other places like that. We kind of move it around. Have some in Canada, have some in South America, and then have like depots that like kind of put those things together. I think one of the real problems that we have is the race to zero or the race to the bottom, where people are just trying to essentially outsell each other, and then they'll raise prices afterwards. And the they're trying to rely on just the market bearing their greed, um, at the time that they want to raise those prices back up, not really realizing that they've kind of created a situation where people, you know, they they can't afford, or they're driving like an inflationary situation, or something like that, um, and then you have things like every company that sees one company profiting in some way immediately tries to jump on that bandwagon without considering the impact of doing that to the larger scale of things that are out there. So streaming is an example of that, where every company is trying to get some sort of streaming app out there that they can get subscription fees out of. But I mean, the whole point of streaming is it's supposed to get away from cable, the cable subscriptions, and now we've just got cable plus a whole bunch of extra BS on top of it.
Mm.
So the global economy is kind of like that too. Like we made this thing, this one like monolithic thing that had all these compartmentalizations, but it basically like kind of worked together. And like you said, we are looking at places where the stock of anything is only like a couple of days old, and in a region you've only got about 90 days worth of stock to like support that whole area. And the companies and the governments that are looking at that are just kind of like, yeah, whatever, it's no big deal, you know we'll be able to continue to make that happen. But they're not thinking about the long-term impacts of those things. They're only like immediate today. So I think if we're going to go back to having a non-globalized economy, or the globalized economy is going to change, I actually think that that's a very good thing, even though it's going to be super painful right now. And from a technological perspective, which is what we generally talk about here, that probably means it's going to be hard to get some of the cool technologies that are coming out from these big companies that make those things. But it does give room for other players to come in smaller or larger markets where those companies haven't set up an infrastructure that's local to those markets, right? Um,
Yeah, in some regards, definitely in places that are mostly software driven, because if you don't have to be competing with the big boys for particular like pieces of hardware. I'm thinking like a lot of home automation stuff and things like that. There's definitely a much more accepting market for outside of the big names, you know. You know, but you hit on a good point of like the race to the bottom. And I think that is what's really done a lot of damage to the economy today compared to like the economies our parents had and our grandparents had. You know, this idea that you build a product and if you build it to last forever, well, you don't get repeat customers. So, you know, things have switched over to things are a lot cheaper now, but they don't last as long, right?
Yep.
So, you know, you go out, like my grandmother, she bought a couch when they moved into their house. They had that same couch her entire life, lasted like 50 years. I've never had a couch last more than 6 or 7 before it needs significant work on it. And you know, granted, dollar per dollar, her couch was really expensive because it was made by like there's some good old boys, you know, that ran a furniture shop. It wasn't this big mass produced, cost cut down in every corner they can kind of thing. But the problem is once you switch people to that mindset, that like, look, we were talking about earlier, I'm moving into a house, I'm going to buy a dish set. I don't expect this to be something that lasts forever. I fully expect those plates to chip after a year or two. So when I'm looking at price, I care a lot more. Oh, is this other set really similar, but it's $20 cheaper? Yeah, I'll probably buy that cheaper one because they're not long-term investments anyway. So I think this makes that kind of like negative feedback loop, right? Like they're trying to make things cheaper to help their bottom line, but the same points that no longer has sort of longevity products used to have, I'm not willing to spend as much on it. And so they're racing to the bottom to have their side cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. Because if they raise their prices too much, I'm not gonna buy their product anymore. Because the quality of the product's not getting better. Some might even say this negative feedback loop is causing like the quality of products get worse because they're making more and more concessions to try and make it cheaper and cheaper. And so, you
Right.
know, you're right. Even outside of any of the supply chain stuff and things like that, I don't think that's a sustainable trend. At some point, you know, there's going to have to be that adjustment where, okay, because of inflation or whatever, prices are just going to have to go up. This thing that used to be, you know, $30 at Target is now $40 at Target. And I mean, if the quality doesn't get better with the rising prices, unless it's a necessity, people aren't going to buy it. It's not like wages are keeping up right now or have been for the last like 20 years. So, you know, at some point, you start pricing yourself out of what people will accept.
Yeah, and I I think that it's probably better to have something that is more sustainable overall than it is to have something that gets you the maximum amount of profit right now. And
Yeah,
that's
and
the way we look at things.
that's a really good point as well, right? I forget who I was watching, but I was listening to this guy talk about product manufacturing and like what makes a good product a bad product, what makes you a good company and a bad company when you're developing products and things like that. And one of the things he brought up is that like, you know, everything in the world is made of mass. There's only so much mass. So whatever product you're making, you know, even if it's not offensive, even if it's not like that you're just egregiously polluting or something like that. Like even if you're following like green guidelines and stuff like that. If you are building a low quality product that people aren't going to buy or it's going to break or it's going to have other issues, you are taking mass from the planet that might not easily be gotten back. You know, if the kind of product you're making isn't super recyclable or anything like that, I mean, even if they are, you're still taking resources from the earth and putting it into something that you can't really get back a lot of times. So at the same end, if you're building something that's cheap and it's a piece of junk and it's going to break in a couple of years, even if it's cheap, like the metals you took out of the ground, if you get a really responsible, consumer, maybe they'll try and get it recycled. They can just end up in the ocean somewhere, thrown across some trail, doing damage to the environment, and you enabled that by making a product that people didn't want to actually use.
Yeah.
That's just like physical waste you've produced into the world that is your unfortunate product.
And I mean, it's easy for us to think about the world in terms of software and these services that we provide and subscription services and all that stuff. But the fact of the matter is that you can only have so much of that before it hits um, a critical mass, and then you can't. It just kind of can't exist anymore. Um, and when that happens, you either have to make things cheaper or you fall apart. And so you either end up selling the same like kind of thing that's made of lower quality for less because you're still trying to keep your high margins or your high profit, or whatever it is that you're trying to do, or you end up having a kind of situation where everything just kind of falls apart, you know. And if we don't really consider those things as we're going forward as a society, we're gonna have some problems. We're already
Yeah, well,
starting to see those problems.
we we live right now in a world that is mostly driven by luxury. What I mean by that is if you look at the type of jobs people have, if you look at the type of products they consume, most of this work, at least in the Western world, at least, well, I should maybe even just say America, because I don't know as much about the European job markets and stuff. But the average person, if you just pick them up off a shelf, they work in some type of service. They're working in retail, they're working in food, they're working in entertainment, they're working in, the average person is not a producer. You know, they provide a service as being there as a person. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
And you look at history, not the case. For most of history, people were producers, and not on grand scale. You know, I know we've talked about before that, like, our grandparents, they had farms. They weren't necessarily servicing a community, but they were feeding their own families. They were producing their own stuff, and we've moved away from that. First kind of into factories that were local, and then factories that are no longer local. And most people work some sort of job that's really about kind of just shifting money back and forth between people. Like, less, I'm buying this product for you that I need this product. It's not something I can make myself. One of the biggest things my family spends money on is like going out to eat. You know, we live pretty tight, but we still, go out for date nights once a week, order pizza in every now and then, that sort of stuff. Like food, we can make it ourselves, but we're paying someone else to make it for us. And then, tips for delivery drivers and things like that. And that really only works when there is disposable income, right? Like if suddenly I lost my job, I'm not feeding that income in the economy anymore. I'm not going to be ordering pizza like once a week if I don't have disposable money. And you already see that in a lot of poorer communities. And as inflation goes up and as things get tighter and as we're having these discussions about like, hey, maybe the way that we're doing supply chain and product isn't really sustainable. Like, at what point do you hit that critical mass that when, like, hey, no one's really getting paid enough anymore, at least in a large enough number, to support some of these industries?
right.
Like even really big healthy industries. Like my sister, she works up in New York City. She's in entertainment. When COVID hit, entertainment was the first thing to go.
Yeah.
People couldn't go out places, or they suddenly didn't have the money to go out places. And that industry is still reeling over there because people didn't have that luxury anymore. And so that makes more people that don't have income that they can't spend on luxuries, and that just kind of like piles and piles and piles. So
Yeah.
that's kind of what's top of my mind. I was talking to my wife about that. Like, look, our parents' generation didn't necessarily have things easy, but they had different concerns. Parents' generation didn't really have to struggle as much to get a house. Education was more valuable. The ratio of income to cost of products was better. People were moving out in their early 20s, getting houses. They were okay. Those houses now cost like, if you're in a poor area, 4 times what you paid for them. In richer areas, 10x plus sometimes.
Yep.
Our generation, pretty much mandatory to have 2 people working, unless one person's like a really high earner. Yeah, my generation kind of getting housing. It's split up. People my age right now, about 50% have a home, 50% still live with family. And that will hopefully get better as because kind of those late 30s, early 40s that are your really money making years. But like my daughter, what's it gonna be like when she's 22, 23, entering the world? What sort of jobs still exist? What is that? How much you make versus how much it costs to live somewhere. We're gonna get an addition put on our house. One, just to make it a bit larger for us, but two, have 2 master bedrooms, just in case. When she's that age, the answer is, well, we're back to multi-generational housing because things have gotten so expensive. So,
Yeah.
maybe that's a downer message to say on the podcast while we're drinking beer. But I do think you're right in that we are at a point something has to change. Now, I don't know what it's going to be. I don't know if it'll even change for the better. But the current lifestyle of the Western world does not match the economy we have in the Western world. So something's going to have to give. Either
And
we got to find a better way to do the economy, or we're looking at a nice recession, depression, whatever you want to call it. And I think it's going to dial back a lot of where people are spending their money today.
yeah, absolutely. And we have so many things that we put so much value in that are worthless. Um, Entertainment. I mean, you were talking about that, and that's an industry and everything. And there's people that work in it, and you know, but art and entertainment and things like NFTs and stuff like that, they're not exactly worth a whole lot. I mean, video games are kind of the same way. Costs like 70, $80 to get a video game right now, right? The worth that that actually has, as far as like what I can't eat a video game, it doesn't like get me prepared for a job necessarily. And maybe there's some educational one out there, you could argue that, but ultimately that system only exists because you have the disposable income. Like your people have to have the disposable income to keep feeding that system. The
Yep.
moment that you start taking, like, you leech and you eat that disposable income away, and you keep them from having that, is the moment that your system fails.
Yep. Because as soon as an industry fails, then all the people that worked in that industry, they don't have income. And it's just that loop.
Yep.
You can go in and say, look, you don't gather much value out of certain systems. But if they're still employing tons of people, as soon as that system's gone, that guy serving popcorn at the AMC, still got to do something. And it it is going to hit that interesting point. And I think when we were younger, right, in like the 2000s, the fear was, hey, look, automation is going to take everyone's jobs. Like if you're not technical, eventually a robot can do your job.
Right.
And that's not really what we've seen. I mean, there certainly is automation, but I mean, what we're really seeing is just the jobs that people would do to make good middle class money, you know, production, factory, things like that. They just don't really exist in large numbers anymore. And those jobs have been replaced by, you know, service industry, entertainment industry, little things like that. I shouldn't call them little things. I mean, those are big industries. But you know what I mean? They're not as well paying and they're not as stable because, if you work in a factory, even though it's hard work and it's not necessarily, you know, it's a trade. It's kind of like being an electrician or a plumber. It doesn't pay quite as well as those, but it's a physical task. It will take some wear on your body. So, I can understand a lot of people don't want to necessarily work those jobs immediately, but those were stable because, if it's not being shipped somewhere else, people still need whatever bulk goods you are creating. If you work in a textile mill, people still need clothes. If you were working in like chip manufacturing, I mean, everything takes chips now, right? I remember
Yep.
during the pandemic, they did this nice drone shot, just these thousands and thousands of new cars. It was about why are used cars becoming so expensive? Because those new cars were finished and they were all waiting for a single chip to get installed that they didn't have.
No, I mean, that's not really
You
during
know,
the pandemic. That's now. That's
well,
happening
yeah, well,
right
the
right
video I
now.
watched was during the pandemic. It
Uh,
was like late 2020
yeah.
when I
Well, I
saw it.
mean, that we say during the pandemic, but even though we're in a different phase of it, it's still happening right now. I mean, people are still catching. Probably not as many. There definitely aren't as many people dying from, but it's still happening. We're still having to be careful and things like that. So
Yeah, but I
it's
think we're
all
in
like a
that
big
phase. It's
impact.
it's life now. In
Yeah, it's
2020, there was talk of when this is over, and I think most people have realized that there is no real end to it. You
right.
just have to get
It's
on
not.
with your life as best you can.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, that's kind of what I'm saying. Like, it still is it still exists though. Like this pandemic is something that it's like having diabetes or something. We as a world have now got cancer or diabetes or whatever it is as just a populace. Whatever like terrible thing that we're having to deal with, that just is, and we've been able to mitigate it to some extent, but that wasn't really the topic. I just, it plays into it because just like you were saying, the, that they were saying, well, it's because of this. Maybe, but also maybe it's because of the greed of people. That's not the root cause. That's a
Yeah, well,
catalyst that triggered, this thing happening. It's not the root cause of it that caused us to be in this like tight
yeah, exactly.
supply chain.
There's so many things that go into it, and even outside of that, I mean, I think you talked about Netflix earlier. Netflix has just massively dropped in stock price
Hmm.
because it's had one quarter in its entire existence that it lost subscribers quarter to quarter,
Right.
and it dropped like 25%. And people aren't doing that. I mean, 90% of stocks are not owned by individuals, they're owned by these big trading companies, and they trade it to make profit.
Yep.
And so that's also part of like the unhealthy market we have, right? Because if you're a company and if you have a single quarter where you produce less than expected, that your company will tank in value by 25%, well, you're probably going to work real damn hard to make sure you never make less money quarter over quarter.
Yep. And you might even fudge some things to make sure that you don't.
Yeah, you might do
Or
some things that maybe are not illegal, but not as morally sound as they could be to
yep.
make sure your company still survives. Because you're beholden to people who just hold your stock purely to make more money off of it. And that can that leads to its own problems, right?
Yeah. And I mean, as people that I do own stock, I want that to help me garner some wealth. Um, but not like that. Like
Yeah.
I don't want to wake up in the morning, look at myself in the mirror and be like, man, today I'm gonna make sure some old grandma doesn't get her pension, or
Yeah, I think the average person looks at stocks as an investment vehicle. It's like I don't need this to make me money every day. I need it to be more than it is now, 10 years from now, when I'm ready to do whatever.
yep,
And a lot of places don't, well, since 90% of the market, I guess, doesn't really think that way. If you made them extra money that quarter, you're great. If you didn't, I'll go find somewhere else to invest my money. And that leads to this very negative view of, look, everything's got to be super profitable. Oh, can I make this thing 5% cheaper? Awesome. I'm going to do it. I don't really care what that means,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. I mean, exactly. It's I'll be able to make a profit, and I don't care. And my company is going to be worth $50 billion or 5 trillion or whatever it is. And that's just the sort of stuff that, I mean, at that point, what are you doing? Like, that you're just doing that to keep other people from being able to get there. You're not doing that to to sustain anything or anything like that. You've gotten to the point that you're not going anywhere, right? Um, I mean, it's kind of like this thing that Disney and Nintendo do, right? They talk about like their intellectual properties and all this other stuff, but ultimately they did all this crap in the 80s and 60s and 30s, to to you know get themselves to the point that they're kind of on top, and now they're afraid of someone else succeeding enough that they may one day be on top also, you know. Instead of kind of being like, hey, if I promote you and I'm generous and I do all these like good things, you guys might actually also do well, and that, like, brings us all up a little bit. No, instead, oh, I don't want you streaming my video games. I don't want you, doing this or doing that. And I mean, ultimately, yeah, it's their content, it's their right, and sure, that's fine. But that doesn't mean that they're being moral or good or kind or any of those things with that stuff. And I think these companies that do these things, they're kind of the same way. They're just they're not thinking about the impact of what it will be to the average person, and they don't care about that. What they care about is getting, 15 million more dollars this hour or whatever it is that they're trying to get. And while that can be good in some times because you need focus, losing the forest for the tree or losing the tree for the forest is generally um, bad ultimately. Um, what good is it to have all the money in the world if there is no world? What good is it to be a soulless company who, makes massive amounts of profits and able to get all this stuff if you like basically eat the people that are investing in you or that are doing all these other things? So I mean, that's the same thing with the global economy. It's just kind of fallen over. And one of the reasons that I put this, so we've talked about this for like 35 minutes, and I think I should put some context here. One of the reasons that we're talking about this is that as professionals working in this landscape, we make this many times. We're anyone that's listening to this podcast that's listening to it from the technology standpoint is probably listening to it because they work in IT or some sort of IT tangential thing, and or maybe at some point they might have some sort of say so in how things go. And if you forget the people that you're working with, your technology just becomes meaningless. Your tech could be great. No politics. I don't care about like whether like who the person in the White House is or I mean I care, but not like from the standpoint of what I'm talking about here. Um, this is just a kind of flat and simple thing. If you've got stuff that's happening in the world and it is keeping you from being you might be getting wealthy off of it, but it's not promoting everyone else to also do well, you're going to be alone at the end of it. There's not going to be anyone else to be there with you to enjoy the fruits of that labor. Even if you want to bring them along, they're going to be struggling so much to like continue on that they're not going to be able to go alongside of you. And so, if you're trying to make some sort of tech or software or something like that, is it is it worth your time to just take a moment and go, okay, how is this impacting the other people that are around me? And can I actually like do something positive with it instead of does it just make me profit? Right. Um, I guess is the ultimate like kind of context I'm trying to put this in. And from a global economy, we kind of screwed that pooch as a big tech uh, society. We've looked at all this stuff and we say, we're we're going to continue to be able to make profits. We're going to get people to invest in our companies. We're going to have like all these rich people run our companies and stuff like that. But we don't give enough credit to the Steve Wozniaks and what was that engineer guy that made the Coke machines for like McDonald's and stuff like that. Shoot, I forgot his name, but he was just like he is a brilliant engineer. Dean Kamen, that's his name. He's a brilliant engineer, does all this great stuff. But one of the things that he did was he wanted to make potable water machines for people that couldn't get clean water. So in order to do the thing that he wanted to do, he had to like kind of make a deal with a company that had the supply chain to do that. I mean, all those things they're like good and admirable, and we don't really like put enough emphasis on those things as the things that we should be looking up to. Instead, we look up to people that maybe we shouldn't, like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or somebody like that. And while there's things that we could learn from them, Steve Jobs got a whole bunch of credit for like Apple's success and things like that, but really there would be no Apple and half of the things that they developed, especially in their early formative years, if there was no Steve Wozniak, right?
Mhm.
And Steve Wozniak was really the genius who created like all the stuff. I'm not saying Jobs didn't have a contribution, but the contribution was probably disproportionate as far as like credit got because Steve Jobs got all the front facing stuff. He was able to like stand out there and stand in front of everybody and pull the iPod out of his pocket, and everybody loved him for it. But the the fact of the matter is that the engineers were the people who came up with that stuff, and they're kind of faceless and in the background, and nobody's like learning about them and trying to replicate them and stuff like that. And that's probably sad. I feel like I'm rambling a little bit. Hopefully, I'm not. I'm not too far off topic. Um, I'll let you rein me in a little.
No, but I understand where you're going with it. There's a lot of sitting in front of the world and saying, look at all these great things we're doing. But when you really get into fine tooth comb of things, I mean, how are a lot of these people really doing all the good they say they are? You know, there's a kind of sinisterness to the way like marketing works in the world, right? You come in, hey, here's this great product. It's all good. Don't look at how many times we've been sued for something bad we did. Don't look at this over here. I mean, I forget who it was. I'm not gonna say the company name because I don't remember who it was. I mean, it's a big name, but there's a ton of those that have gotten in trouble for this. But like just this year, a company who for like 6 years has been saying, "Don't worry, guys, we're not gonna use child slavery and labor in this country anymore that we get our product from. We used to do it, but not really because they were employees. They weren't slaves. Come on, guys. And we're gonna stop doing it." And then like in the pandemic, they just came out and said, "Yeah, yeah, you know what? No, not this year. Too expensive. We can't find a way to keep our products without making children go out into the fields and pick whatever it was. Forget if it was like a chocolate or a coffee or something like that."
Yeah,
And that's just what it was. Their commitment to no longer doing child slavery just stopped because they couldn't make it cheap enough otherwise. And That's where that hits, and you don't see that stuff. You don't think that stuff. Same way with like, a lot of water companies are buying water rights to like giant water reserves around the world.
Yep.
You know, that's a little scary.
I mean, that's Nestle. That's what Nestle does, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Nestle,
the way you get
they're not the
water.
only ones.
I know
When you,
that they're just the one I
yeah,
was talking
yeah,
about.
Nestle did a lot of stuff in like California, all over the world. But
Right.
on the flip side, how often do you buy this bottled water, which isn't even special? That was my favorite little tidbit I learned a couple years ago. Is that unless it like specifically says it is from like a particular like area, particular springs or certain things like that, those aren't like protected terms. So a lot of your like purified special healthy water is just tap water from whatever
Yep.
city the distributor is set up in, and they run it through a water filter. Like if you got a Brita
Yep.
at home, you're producing the
Same
same
thing.
stuff that's in half of these name bottles of
Yep.
water. And then we're flipping back to it now though, of like how much plastic are we producing to fill bottles of water up with tap water? You know?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. It's just a cycle of greed and
Yeah, and they hide
insane.
it from people. I mean,
Yeah.
or was it the vitamin water one? That was a good one. A lawsuit of like, I forget who made the vitamin water. It was like one of Coke's products or something like that. But it
There's
had some
there's
vitamins
multiples
in
of
it.
them. Yeah.
Yeah, one particular one got sued. That's why I don't remember which one it was. But one of them, because it's got all this sugar and flavoring and stuff in it. Um, place they got sued for it for basically making a health drink that wasn't actually healthy, and they got the case thrown out because they were able to convince the judge. Who in the world, in their right mind, would think vitamin water is healthy? Like, you hear the
Why would
word
they think
vitamin
that's
water
healthy?
and you think health? That's crazy. You're insane.
Yeah.
Which is not true. I think almost everyone hears vitamin and thinks healthy, and that's why their marketing team called it vitamin water after doing all their studies. You know, but they purposely made a product that's not good for you, advertised it as good for you, and then when people said, "Hey, that's not actually good for you. You've done damage to people," they said, "Oh, no, we didn't. You guys are just crazy for thinking it was healthy."
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the story. That's this is just the reiteration of everything that we said since we started this topic. It, because people are, I mean, there's always going to be some unscrupulous people, but because people are not able to really decouple themselves from this stuff, we're just kind of trapped in it. It's our responsibility as people who may have some sort of power over that to make sure that we're not abusing those people. I mean, we already have laws that when someone's got mental health deficiencies or things like that, that if you found out to be um, abusive to those people or taking advantage of them, you suffer a penalty. Kind of almost the same sort of thing that globally we should be doing to companies. And some countries do have some things that kind of slow that stuff down, but ultimately we're not really doing a as a global society, we're not doing a really great job of limiting those things, limiting
Yeah,
those problems.
there's definitely stuff we could do, especially like in the Western world. Like I like we've got this little Mexican market right next to our house, and we like to buy for like mixed drinks and stuff. The little bottles of the Mexican Coke. There's really just regular Coke made with cane sugar instead of high fructose corn syrup. But that thing imported from Mexico, there's no English on that bottle, is covered in little stickers and warnings that are like, there's so much sugar in this, excessive calories, be careful.
Yep.
You don't see that over here. I mean, what we were talking about earlier before the podcast, I'm looking for plates for my house. And I'm looking at this website, and it's like, oh, here's this all new material. It's great. It's cheaper than glass, but doesn't chip, and all this stuff. And I Google, and the first dang thing is like FDA warning. And it's like, okay. I was like, oh, well, when it's in a plate, we don't think it gets on the food, But oh man, if you have any in your food, that's a big problem. You need to not be doing that. It's like, okay, so this new material has just come out that's already saying, hey, yo, don't ingest, but I'm going to put my food on it. Reminds me of all the, hey, look, leaded gas is so good for you. Leaded paint lasts so long. Asbestos is the best insulation. No, tobacco actually helps you stop coughing.
Yep.
You know, and like you're not trying to be anti-advancement. New materials are great, but at the same time, how am I going through multiple websites comparing these plates and nobody wants to tell me of like, oh, hey, this is actually what it is? Because I saw the name for it, but none of them wanted to elaborate that it's a dangerous chemical plastic, but it's safe if it's food grade.
Yeah.
Just ignore that. It's cheaper. You can get it cheaper than you can this other stuff, and it's still really strong.
On that note, I think we should end the podcast here. It's so sobering. I want to go drink some whiskey.
Yeah, I've already finished my beer, and you're right. When we do these remote ones, we get going. It's been like what, an hour on the
Yes,
recording almost.
it's been 56 minutes that we've been recording. Yeah. By the time I get done with my spiel, it'll be over. It'll be over an
Mm,
hour. So, yeah. I mean, this is the thing though. It's a great talk. I hate to like end it, but I'm also kind of like, yeah, we probably should wrap that up. Just because we had another topic I was going to talk about Chromebooks and gaming on them, but no, that doesn't fit in anymore.
Next time, more fun.
Next time, yeah,
We'll
it'll be
re-revisit
coming up.
Steam Deck, and then we'll connect into the Google Chrome, get the Chromebooks out.
Yeah, I mean, I've got one over here. I definitely could pop it out and like do some stuff with it. But anyways, man. So this has been. Oh, and I forgot my notes. This has been season 5, episode 4 of the Beer and Broadband podcast. We have Twitter and Patreon and stuff like that we generally have linked in our show notes. We'd love for you to like engage with us in any of those locations. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.